Okay, teaching social skills. This lecture is meant to accompany the social skills chapter in your Wheeler text. Okay, so basically, first of all, we need to figure out what are social skills and what is social competence, because these are two different ideas that we need to be well familiar with in order to be able to understand how our students with autism are functioning. Okay, so social skills are discrete or individual social behaviors that are exhibited by most people, okay? Or they are idioms or metaphors that are understood by most people. So, for example, when someone says, go jump off the bridge, does that really mean that they want you to go jump off a bridge? Highly unlikely that is their thought. Really, what they're trying to say is, I need some space, or you're being silly, or you're being completely crazy about this idea you're talking about, or leave me alone. It could mean a variety of different things. Now, the person with autism is more likely to assume that they just really hate them and can't stand to be around them, and they want them to go jump off a bridge and die. That's pretty much what they usually think. But social competence is being able to look at what somebody says or what they do and come up with a common sense idea of what they were really meaning. And so social competence really is how someone perceives the performance of an individual, the social performance, or their exhibited behavior, and what they really meant. So Freya stated that the specific level of social skills exhibited by the child may not be as important as the effect these skills have for producing positive and reinforcing interactions for all concerned. So let's think about what Freya may have meant by that. That our social skills that we have may or may not be quite as important as how we use them. So, and then Rose Kranzer stated that there is a link between peer difficulties, or social relationships, and poor social and emotional and academic adjustment. So, and this is for all of our kids. It's not just kids with autism. How our students with autism behave is directly linked to the difficulties that they might have in understanding those that are around them. So Wang and Kubo completed a study, and they evaluated 52 adults. And these were adults with mild to moderate intellectual disabilities. Their overwhelming consensus was that the major reason for unsuccessful employment was a lack of social skills and inappropriate social behaviors. Now, this doesn't just have to do with people with intellectual disabilities. It also applies to individuals with autism, individuals with emotional or antisocial behaviors, people with ADHD, learning disabilities. This kind of goes across the board with the neurological behaviors. So, when we're thinking about social competency, we need to be able to think of, we understand basically what social competency is, but how are we going to operationalize it? Now, that's a kind of a technical research term that we use, and to operationalize something means that we're going to give it a definition as to how it's supposed to act, or how are we going to know when we see it, okay? So it's our definition for the definition, basically. So, for different types of skills, we need to have a set of desirable skills, okay? Sociometric status is how do they get along with their peers. Relationships is the quality of their individual relationships. And functional outcomes focuses on the outcomes of the social behavior. So basically, what we're stating is that social competency has to do with the skills that an individual has, how those skills translate into positive peer status related behaviors. So social skills are, generally speaking, we think of them as the central deficit for a student with ASD. So what we know is that it's a severe and pervasive impairment in several areas of development, okay? So reciprocal social interaction skills, communication skills, stereotypical behavior, and within interests and activities. So plainly stated, if you look back at the definition for autism, this is kind of like a squashed view of much of the definition, okay? So what we're really saying is that individuals with social competency, social skills deficits, they have a lot of difficulty interacting with others because they don't always understand what they're supposed to do next or what the person that they're talking to or communicating with is going to do next. That's why we call this a communications deficit, okay? They also tend to have stereotypical behavior, which also adds to the issue of communications deficits. So how is social competency impaired in people who have ASD? First of all, social skill limitations are often larger than the limitations in other areas of adaptive behavior, because if you have difficulties with social skills, that is often seen much sooner than other areas of adaptive behavior. So if you know how to say thank you and please and you're welcome at appropriate times, that might be more desirable to be able to do those things than perhaps ride a bicycle or load the dishwasher, which are also very important daily life skills, or at least be able to do the dishes. So again, people who have ASD tend to have more impaired social skills just simply because they don't understand those skills. So when we think about an iceberg, I was going to put a picture of an iceberg on here and I forgot, I'm sorry. But kind of picture it in your mind's eye. So the first thing that we see in an iceberg, if you've watched the Titanic, you'll be able to see how you can remember how big an iceberg would be in relationship to a large ship, okay? So the iceberg on the top of the iceberg mountain that's floating out there in the North Atlantic, is fairly large. So what we see is a lack of social interaction, aimless wandering with their topics, aggression when they are misunderstood, tantruming, and an over-focus on solitary or single object directed acts. They tend to hoard things at times, and then they tend to use things in non-functional ways as well. They have a limited repertoire of activities, and they're sometimes very non-responsive, not unresponsive, just non-responsive. They assume that they have responded, but we didn't recognize it as responding. So now they may not have all of these in every iceberg, but we're going to see a good many of them. What we don't see at the base of the iceberg, underneath the surface, is which types of supported skills do they need. So those are things we're going to actually have to delve for. We're going to have to look at predictability. How can we make their life more predictable? How can we help them to appropriately use language, to appropriately communicate, to be able to tolerate others? I mean, that one's a big one, okay? And often our individuals with Asperger's syndrome, they have a lot of difficulty being able to just tolerate being around other people. Individuals with Asperger's syndrome tend to be quite intelligent. Now, the definition says that they have to have at least an average IQ. Quite honestly, I've never met a person on the spectrum with Asperger's that just had an average IQ. An 85 would be extraordinarily low for the average ASD or ASPE. But they do have a lot of difficulties being able to be around others, okay? Some characters that I think of when I think of ASPE or Aspergerish kinds of behavior is Sherlock as it's played by Benedict Cumberbatch, okay? Is a bit, the character, the way it's played there, is a bit Aspergerish, okay? And one of the comments that he makes is, you know, something along the lines of, what do you do in that funny little head of yours? You know, or are all people as unintelligent as you are? How do you manage? You know, I've heard a lot of Aspies make comments very similar to this. Another television character that I watch from time to time is now I can't remember his name. Well, it'll come back to me. I'm sure it will, and I'll tell you about it in class. But anyway, there are a lot of characters that they Aspies are very popular to be recreated on television because there's so many facets to their personality. So when we think about what is underneath that iceberg, we need to really get to know them so that we can have a better understanding of what their real needs are, okay? Helping them to be able to read verbal and nonverbal social cues, okay? What does a raised voice mean? Well, to most of us, it just means that it's a raised voice. Individuals with Asperger's tend to assume that you're angry because that's what they don't like loud noises. When you turn the vacuum cleaner on at home, do they take off and go to another room? That's a really good indication of how they react when someone is speaking loudly to them. How do they initiate information? How do they initiate conversation? You know, how do they get attention? How do they know how to negotiate? Do they know how to compromise? Okay, this is a skill, but that we have to teach individuals on the spectrum. Do they know how to take turns? This one is sometimes a difficult one to teach because their attention level is lower, but their ability to persevere with boredom is also greatly impaired. Okay, so we have some social characteristics here. And I have a couple of slides in here that just look at tendencies and weaknesses, okay? So solitary play. The tendency, it's a functional tendency, so they can play by themselves. They can also perseverate all they want when they're doing solitary play. And it's usually contextually driven. So it could be that they are playing one video game over and over and over, or playing with one wheel on a truck over and over and over. It could also be that they like to watch one particular television show, or play one particular type of game, or collect. When they have collections, they might collect certain particular types of things, but not a wide range of things. So when you think about solitary play, look at perseveration and context. Their imagination, when we're talking about a functional, that it's rather functional, it tends to be a weakness for them. Okay, that doesn't mean they have a weak imagination. It just means that it's a weakness for them because they have a hard time breaking out of it. It tends to be that they are a bit inflexible, and spontaneous behavior is sometimes quite scary for them. Now, social play, we're talking about parallel or joint activities. Now, parallel play, that's where two people are sitting together playing, but that doesn't mean that they're playing together. Okay, so parallel play means that you have two children playing with blocks. They are both sitting on the floor playing with blocks, but they're playing their own kind of game, each of them, with their blocks. Now, joint play is where they build a road together with their blocks. Okay? And that's really kind of the difference. And this means that it's more of a reciprocal kind of, when you're using joint, it's more of reciprocal give and take. But parallel, they're just kind of cooperating with each other. They're, more than anything else, they're putting up. So then when we think about social and emotional domains, we need to look at emotions and sensory issues. Okay, so think about what the environment is like. Is the carpet rough? Because I have seen some children who, during circle time, they would have their own mat because everybody else would be sitting on the carpet, but then Susie over here would have her little mat that she sits on because the carpet, the feel of the carpet was just too much for her. Or you would have, instead of overhead lights being turned on, we would have lamps all over the room, simply because of the different sensory issues. Okay, so we've got this framework for designing social intervention, and I had this on several different slides, but then I realized that it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense unless it was all in one place. At least that was my idea. So we're going to start up here with the light blue, cognitive, and this is called the say, do, watch, listen, okay? Or the do, watch, listen, say, whichever way you want to look at it, okay? But we're going to start off with the cognitive first, because cognition is usually where everything starts. So when we think about cognition, we're usually thinking about being able to do something. So being able to use toys or objects or materials, we have to be able to think of how to use them. So we're using closed-ended activities, open-ended activities, and creative types of activities. But we're going to do something with them. Okay, so then we move over across the page to socialization. We have to have a way of knowing how to use those activities. That's where we get socialization from. We tend to watch other people to figure out what they're doing with this novel thing that we're working with, and then we roll that over into how we are going to understand that activity. So observation skills can contribute to an understanding of how to imitate, share physical space, toys and materials, and take turns. Think of it, watch kids with autism in a group of children without autism, especially those Aspies. Their Aspies are very, very good at figuring this part out. Now, they're not always so great at figuring out why you do it. They just know they're supposed to, okay? So, for example, if they are at lunch with a group of kids and the kids are telling jokes, and they tell a joke, and everybody laughs, but the Aspie just kind of has this kind of quizzical look on their face, and then they laugh. They laugh because everybody else is laughing, and they know that that's appropriate. They just don't know why it's funny. You know, and I've seen a lot of kids go through this, and one of the things that I tell them is, okay, when you see other people laughing, go ahead and laugh because, you know, that's appropriate behavior if it's a funny joke. But if you don't understand the joke, find an adult later that you can tell the joke to and to find out why it's funny. Because part of our job is to help them overcome the barriers of social, with a lack of social reciprocity. So helping them to be able to share physical space and toys and materials, and to be able to take turns and to laugh at jokes and to be able to figure out what those jokes mean. Now, yeah, that kind of goes into communication, but I think most of socialization is communication anyway. Now, language. It means that we have to be able to listen for things. We have to be able to listen to others, which again is a social skill. But we have to be able to assign meaning to what we hear and see and communicate, or what is communicated to us. So we need to be able to respond to those, to gestures. What does a gesture mean? If you see a hand straight out and the palm towards you, it could mean stop. You know, there's a lot of gestures out there. A finger gesturing to yourself could mean come here. You know, a shrug, well, that could mean a lot of things. You know, so depending on the group of kids that you're communicating with. And, you know, so we need to help them to be able not just to listen with their ears, but to listen with their eyes and to be able to really understand what's going on around them. So to be able to respond to verbal and nonverbal messages. Okay, and finally, we have communication. We have to know what to say to people and how to respond. Because, as we know, 70% of communication is nonverbal. So it's not necessarily that we're saying it with our mouth, but we could be saying it with our body. So we need to be able to use nonverbal messaging to talk to others, okay? We also need to be able to request things, okay? Raise our hand if we need some help. That is a nonverbal request. Using verbal requests, can you come and help me, please? Knowing that it's okay to ask your teacher for help. This is one of those requests that it doesn't matter how old they get, they still tend to have difficulties with it. To be able to make a comment about something, to maintain a conversation, to understand what the different parts to a conversation are, and when to move on to the next topic. Okay, so then we need to think about social hierarchies, okay? So we've got solitary activities, as we know, adult and child, child to child, to peers, and group hierarchies. Okay, so how do we manage in all of those areas? So some different activity types are unison behaviors, choral, nonverbal turn-taking, verbal turn-taking, unstructured and structured play, and discussion. Okay, so here I've kind of put together, this was on like about 4 or 5 different slides, but I felt like you might get a little bit more out of it if you actually just saw it all in one place. Because the 4 or 5 slides was a little overwhelming for me to look at, so I figured it would be for everyone else as well. Okay, so a unison activity. This is where everybody's doing the same thing at the same time, but everyone has their own set of materials. Okay, so this might be where everybody has their own color sheet. Okay, or ring around the rosy. That's, to me, that was what was on the chart that I found. But I think color sheets are a little bit better for that. Okay, everybody has their own crayons. Everyone has their own color sheet or worksheet, but we're all doing the same thing at the same time. Okay, there aren't really a lot of language demands. They don't have to be, and there's no waiting because everybody's working on it at the same time. Then we have choral. Everyone's doing the same thing at the same time, or they're reading out loud at the same time, they're listening at the same time, and they all basically have they can all have their own set of materials, but they're expected to stay together. So you're listening to music, or you're singing, or you're at circle time. There is some language required, but again, there's no waiting. Okay, so then we go on to structured activities. Structured activities require sharing toys and materials. These might include board games, could be adult directed. It could be, sharing materials such as working on your own worksheet, but having to share colors. Okay? Now that sometimes is difficult for students with autism. Playing catch. We have one ball, and everyone is sharing in the verbal information, okay? You don't have to have language demands for it. You might not. But there is a bit of social predictability, and what that means is that when we're playing catch, or we're playing toss, the ball, or roll the ball, or whatever you want to call it, there's a give and take to the game that we're going to be playing. Okay, so then we have some nonverbal. Nonverbal can include social games. It can include turn taking. And there's probably going to be some waiting required. Although you don't have to have nonverbal. I just kind of put these together here. Then you have some unstructured activities. There's really no social predictability. You might play with someone else in joint attention, but then again, you might not. This can be seen at recess or at free time. You might or might not need language, and it could mean that there's cooperative play, but not necessarily, okay? And there might be some waiting required, okay? Then we have conversations and group discussions. Now, there's no social predictability. There are social rules, but no real predictability because you can't always tell how a conversation or discussion is going to go. But this is one of those where you are going to have language required, at least the ability to take in language and respond to it. Okay, so I've got some ideas for early social skills, okay? And these are the imitation. This is kind of necessary for like the watch and the do part of the interaction that we were talking about a minute ago. And it often needs to be directly taught, but it can also be transferred pretty easily. Okay, so follow the leader. Simon Says. These are all imitation kinds of games that we teach children so that they can learn how to imitate and some of those social responses. Now, to do this, we're going to have to use direct teaching. And I have slide on direct teaching here in a second. And so we're going to be directly teaching activities or topics that have to do with the cognitive portion of communication. And this has to do with pro-social behaviors. How do you say you're sorry? This is how I taught students to appropriately say that they were sorry. First of all, you say the person's name that you hurt their feelings. Then you tell them, Johnny, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings by stepping on your foot. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. And then Johnny would say, oh, Sally, thank you for apologizing for stepping on my foot because it did kind of hurt. And so what you're doing is you're teaching kids that every individual has the right to be recognized as a person, and that we need to apologize when we've hurt someone's feelings, even if it's something as small as stepping on someone's foot, okay? Because with 5-year-olds, that's a really big deal, okay? So, pro-social behaviors will stay with us for the rest of our lives. And then when we choose to use that pro-social behavior, it's a conscious choice. We may not always think that it's a conscious choice, but when we choose not to, that's definitely a conscious choice. And then we also need to teach them how to negotiate. Having some trade skills, okay? Instead of having some of these hoarding behaviors that many of our children wind up with, we need to teach them how to trade one thing for another so that everybody gets what they want, at least part of the time. Because trading is actually part of socialization. Looking at turn taking. Establish turn taking early. A really great way to do this is, if you can, take kids on bowling trips, or play games where everybody has to take turns, and that taking the turn is part of the game, okay? That's why I like bowling, because you always have to take turns in bowling. And then start expanding the length of each turn so that everybody has to be able to understand short turn taking and long term turn taking, okay? So maybe going to a movie and having to stand in line. That's a little bit longer turn taking, perhaps, than waiting your turn to go bowl again. And so constantly increase the duration of turn-taking activities with different types of activities so that students can generalize and internalize those ideas. And then elaborate with the content of each term. And what I mean by that is have kids talk about how to take turns. Have them explain it and show others how to do it. Okay, some later social skills that you might want to work on is getting people to talk to you, okay? So find some common interests for kids, okay? So I used to know this one little guy that he loved natural disasters, okay? But we wanted him to be able to talk about other things as well, not just natural disasters. Now, rainy days, he loved those because he could tell you all about all kinds of floods all over the place, right? But we also wanted to have him talk about a picture or a piece of art, and so we had to find ways of expanding those topics for him so that he could start being able to have some give and take with those different ideas. Teaching conversation, okay? And here's some different ideas that I came across. A talking stick, okay? So whoever is holding the talking stick, then it is their turn to talk, okay? But then when they get a certain amount of time, they have to pass it on to someone else. So again, we're teaching turn taking, but we're doing it in a more expanded kind of way. Conversation starter cards, because sometimes kids have a hard time just figuring out what to talk about. Okay, I'm sitting here and I don't really know what I'm supposed to be talking about. So starter cards are often helpful with that. So teaching reciprocal interaction, and starter cards are very good for this kind of idea, and you can make your own. You don't need to buy them. So reciprocal interactions. What are we going to talk about first? Okay, I said my piece, and now I need to listen to what you've said so that I can think of something else to add to what you've said, or how I might agree with that, or how some part of what you said is really kind of cool, but I don't really care so much about the rest of it. So I want to talk about this one section that I think is cool, but not the parts that I don't want to bring attention to, the parts that aren't quite so cool. Reading and responding to verbal and nonverbal cues. A really good game for that, and I'm going to show you this in class, if I can. I don't even know if I don't have my copy available, but I will show you a copy of it online. I'll show you I do have the poster that goes along with it. It's Emotional Bingo. Love the game, and you can there's a set of cards, and you just kind of go through different emotions and have kids. The way I played the game, the way I had students play it, was they had to tell me. I would like have a picture of a happy person, okay? So I would say happy. They had to put their little bingo chip on their card, and then one person would get to talk about something that made them happy. Or surprised. And generally speaking, I would have them give me a happy look on their face or a surprised look on their face, because a lot of times our kids have difficulties explaining what's going on in their head because they don't have the vocabulary that goes along with it. So we need to help them learn that vocabulary. So we also want to help them understand acceptance. So cultivate an environment of acceptance. It's not just for kids with disabilities. It's for everyone in the classroom, because we don't want our non-disabled students to feel left out, or that they have to accept others, but they and their own issues are not accepted by everyone. So we want to work towards this for everyone. Looking at social skills groups, you can have conversation, you can look at perspective taking, problem solving, you can talk about sportsmanship, okay? Negotiation and compromise, that's a difficult one for students on the spectrum. Conflict resolution, which I have a little thing here in a minute for that. Understanding cooperation and why it's important. And then using video modeling and video teaching. Now, according to Belva Collins, I think it was 2007 or so, she talks in one of her textbooks about video modeling, and I think I've mentioned this in class before. When we're doing video teaching or video modeling, we want to show them somebody who's much like themselves, but not themselves, producing an action correctly. Because most small children, and this tends to go along with individuals with autism, when they see themselves in a film or movie that you've made, they are usually, she said, that they tend to be so enthralled with the fact that they see themselves up on the screen that they don't get a thing out of the video, which, kind of is very understandable, I think. Okay, so, like I said, direct instruction. I had this a little bit out of sync, I think. First of all, when we're going to directly teach something, you're going to describe the skill and tell them why you're teaching it, okay? They need to know why. We don't just say, this is something we have to learn, all right? No. Why do we have to learn this? Because kids with disabilities need to have a good, clear rationale for learning something, because learning and learning new information takes a lot of time and it takes energy. And if I'm going to expend my energy on this, I want to know that I've got a really good reason for doing so. So then we're going to demonstrate that skill to them. And then we're going to ask them what they think about it, okay? Let them give you some feedback. Then role play the skill with the student. And then provide feedback on their performance. Okay, you did part A and part B right, but we need to work some more on part C. And then start doing generalization activities. Now, this is not going to take one day. This is probably going to take several weeks to get all the way down to 6, okay? So, especially when it's a brand new, difficult skill, you need to realize this is not going to necessarily be over in one day. Okay, so then we have to be able to generalize. Now, most of us generalize on a regular basis, okay? But that's because somebody taught us how to do it a very long time ago. So we're going to be teaching skills that are naturally reinforced in other environments, okay? So responding to peers, saying hello to people, do you want to play with me, okay? And then we're going to expand that to other areas, okay? So we're going to want to show where we're responding favorably to correct social behavior and ignore or redirect inappropriate behaviors. We always ignore or redirect inappropriate behaviors, okay? It's one or the other. When we inadvertently praise an inappropriate behavior, we strengthen that behavior, and therefore makes it much more difficult for us to reframe that behavior or their behaviors that they're giving us. So we want to use as many examples as we possibly can. We have to use at least 3, according to the research. Okay, so we need to use a concrete, an abstract, and a semi-abstract. Okay, I actually got that a little out of order. It's concrete, semi-abstract, and abstract. Okay, it's called CSA. And I don't have it written down here. But if you'll take a note on it, it would probably be very useful for you in whatever it is that you're going to be teaching. Okay, so CSA, concrete, semi-abstract, and abstract. Okay, the way that you use this is you're going to have concrete first. Okay, so say you're teaching math, you're going to use manipulatives first. Something students can touch. All right. So we're going to have our manipulative blocks out there, and we're going to have 4 blocks because we're teaching the number 4. And then, once we understand what the number 4 looks like in pieces, then we're going to put it together in the semi-abstract, which are tally marks. Okay? So we use our pencil and we write tally marks, and we line up the blocks and we line up the tally marks. And then the abstract is the number, the numeral, written numeral 4, okay? It can be the word 4, it can be the numeral 4. Both of those are abstract concepts. So when we're teaching social skills, we want to do it in the same way as much as possible. So when we say hello to someone, we might want to give them a hug at the same time so that they understand that hello is supposed to be a happy thing, right? And then we want to go from that to the more of the semi-abstract. Now remember, with social skills, the CSA is a little bit more, you have to be a little bit more creative with it. And then go to the abstract where somebody is just saying, oh, hi, how are you doing? And you just kind of go on, like when you're walking down the street or you see somebody in the mall, or you might just wave to them, okay? That's actually a pretty abstract kind of thing because you're not using any words. You just see somebody, you wave at them, and you go on. But both people know what you're actually saying. Okay, so when you're doing a training situation, you want to make it as close to the real situation as possible. You also want students to be able to demonstrate the acquisition of the target behavior. So in this case, it might be saying hello or waving at someone. And being able to look at the different components that go into some of the lessons that you're going to be teaching. So whether it's an instruction and role play, whether you're using it in different settings or at different times of the day. And then finally, we're going to have students bring in their own reinforcement, okay? So at first, you might have M&Ms for doing the correct sequence of social skill. Then you might start having them do something that makes them feel good when they get their social skill done right. How think about, can you pat yourself on the back? Okay. Can you, what are some other ways that you can reward yourself for completing this sequence correctly? And then teach students to notice reinforcement that are used in their other classes. Okay? Reinforcement for appropriate behavior. What are some things that teachers did when you said good morning to them? What did they do? Well, they said good morning back. Was that how did you like that? And so then you can talk about how you can use different skills in different places so that we don't have to learn a specific set of skills for each specific place. Okay, so here's our ABC plan that I had up there a few minutes ago. So we're going to state the problem and what the person needs to do. This is when when people are not getting along, okay? And what can we do to fix it or to make a remedy of it, okay? Then we're going to negotiate and come to an agreeable compromise. That doesn't mean that everybody wins. It means that everybody wins a little bit. And then sometimes we have to involve a mediator. So in here you have kind of this little problem-solving grid. And so we have our problem, and might have as many as 3 parts. Some of our possible solutions. What are the pros to the solutions and what are the cons to it? Okay? Did I get the big things that I wanted, or did I not? And then have them either write or draw a picture of the solution that they came up with. Integrating opportunities, different types of opportunities throughout the day. You can have one-on-one talk, circle time, morning meetings, and then you also need to be able to put that in with academic instruction. And by integrating social opportunities, we're going to help students to get more and more used to having conversations and discussions and exhibiting those social skills on a more regular basis. So, but first, as the teacher, you're going to have to structure the physical space so that there are places in your room where people can actually participate in circle time or in a discussion area or a book area. You're going to have some visual support so that they know when it's okay to be in those areas. Start out with some very brief attempts. One good brief attempt can really lead into more longer lasting attempts. Carefully select the peers that you have working on this, okay? Just because somebody wants to participate because they think they might be able to get out of class for it, not a good reason. They have to truly want to be able to help their peers work on social skills. And right here we say capture the motivators. So figure out what kind of motivators are going to work for that child with autism for the social skill that we're teaching. And so then we're going to have to be able to make that motivator work for us so that we can get further along with it. And then continue to expand by the repertoire of activities, we don't want to just stay with one activity. We want to build on all of those activities so that maybe we have a goal that Susie will learn 5 new social skills this 9 weeks. Okay? However big or small, we want to learn 5 new social skills that she can exhibit in other places when we are not there with her. And because when we do this, what we're really doing is we're teaching them flexibility. Because you have to remember that the child with autism has a rather inflexible way of looking at the world. And so by expanding their repertoire of activities or social skills, we are actually increasing their flexibility.